So just to begin with some introductions then, as Adrian has said, I'm Helen Holder. I am the Head of Business Analysis at RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. That's actually a role that I've only been in for 2 months now. So this webinar is quite a timely one for me because I think a lot of people on the call will probably agree that it's when we're stepping into new roles, new challenges, new scenarios, that those kind of mental monsters, those limiting beliefs really start to rear their head and kind of bubble up. So yeah, this is actually a little bit of self-therapy for me this evening. But although I'm new into my current role, I am not new to business analysis. I have been a BA for around 15 years. And as well as doing it as part of my day job, I also really enjoy kind of taking part in the wider community. And I've done some volunteering work in the past with IIBA UK and also currently do some volunteering with YBA, or Young Business Analysts. That's what that stands for. But I think I would say that my most important role is as mom, and I've used the West Midlands spelling. So although for anybody in the US, you'll recognise that one. But I am mom to 9-year-old twins, Jack and Emily. And the reason that I always give them a shout out whenever I run this session is that they're actually like a really massive part of the inspiration behind this topic. And I think it's probably fair to say, in fact, that they are my kind of co-creators on this. So I'm just going to see if I can move us on to the next slide. So what we're here to talk about today is mental monsters and how you can name and tame your limiting beliefs. So we are going to step into that topic in a moment. But before we do, what I want to do is ask you in the chat to share with me your hopes and fears. So we're going to run this exercise called Hopes and Fears. It's an exercise that I have pinched from a lady called Tame, who's also known as the Change Ninja. She uses this as a great way to kind of open up sessions, drive a little bit of participation, and to kind of clarify our expectations on things. So this is all about sharing your hopes on those things that you're really hoping to get out of this session. Your fears are the things, the outcomes that you're looking to avoid. So if there's anything that you are happy to share in the chat, I'm just going to see if I can look at that, and then we'll see if anybody's got any hopes or fears that they're happy to share.
And just to echo what Helen's saying there, because I'm sure a few of you are just finding the chat. It always takes a while to find the chat and type, particularly if you're on a mobile phone or tablet. So hopes and fears, just type them in. Don't worry about spelling. We can normally, we're all used to slightly weird spelling in the chat, but type in anything that you like, hopes or fears. So Marty, imposter syndrome, being found out, failing, criticism. Michelle, hopes to remind myself just how good the session is. Fears having to start all over again. Yeah.
Yeah, reassurance that it's not just me as well. Yeah, I think that's one that a lot of people are kind of looking to do. Okay, please feel free to continue to share those. I think it would be good for us to maybe at the end circle back and see if we've managed to tick some of those boxes and see where we go with that. But the next bit then, just to set some background and some context as to why I wanted to talk about this topic, then we need to travel back a little bit in the mists of time. So when I was quite a bit younger, and we were sort of in early 2020, just before the pandemic kind of kicked in. So at that point, I was working as a lead BA for a government agency that was at that point in time going through kind of like a big piece of change and transformation. And as part of my role, I was working with other kind of change professionals, senior stakeholders, looking at how we were going to approach that change, and then actually kind of like rolling up our sleeves and getting on with actually delivering that. And so when the kind of pandemic hit, when COVID hit, and we were all thrust into this working from home, it had a massive impact on the work that I was doing. So I went from delivering and facilitating face-to-face sessions where maybe you'd have like a maximum of 15 or 20 people coming along, to there being virtual sessions where, because there was no barriers to attendance, they were being forwarded on to the whole organisation. We sometimes had sessions with over 100 people signed into a call. And because there was still concerns at that point around bandwidth and things like that, there were no cameras on, there were no profile pictures. And quite often, if I would sort of ask a question, then there would just be these kind of tumbleweed silent moments. And the tools that I had available to me didn't really help me drive that participation and collaboration. So it was a bit of a stumbling through with some PowerPoint and some Microsoft Whiteboard. And it kind of led to me losing a little bit of confidence in some of my own abilities. Alongside that, as well as kind of trying to get through the day job, I was also kind of battling and balancing childcare, because of course the schools and the nurseries were closed at that point in time. And so kind of trying to balance that childcare and the day job, and the normal kind of support networks I would have leaned on, so family and friends, they weren't available because obviously we were being asked to socially distance. Didn't have those social outlets because of the kind of stay at home mantra. And of course, this was against that wider backdrop of that constant flow of really terrible news that we were hearing at the time about how our health systems were in trouble, and all of these terrible things that were happening and people that were losing their lives. And the net result for me was that I found this that my confidence just completely plummeted. But my anxiety went through the roof. And I think looking back now, I realise how poorly I was kind of coping with that situation. But I wasn't just worried about myself. Obviously I wanted to look after my own sort of mental well-being, but I also had my young children. So this is Jack and Emily that you can see on the screen now, as they were when they were 3 years old. And they were obviously, I was conscious that they were picking up on my sort of perhaps changes in mood, changes in behaviour. But of course, like, their routine had been massively upended. Their structured day at nursery had kind of been, thrown out the window. They weren't seeing their family and their grandparents and all of those things either. And so I started to notice some changes in their behaviour as well. And I wanted to find a way to talk about what I was going through. I wanted to talk to them about what they were going through. But the prospect of kind of trying to have any real meaningful, mental health conversation with 2-3-year-olds left me feeling a little bit daunted and not knowing really how I might approach that. And in the end, what I settled on was that I would use storytelling. So we love a good story in my household. We have always done like a bedtime story, and quite often that has involved us making up our own stories, so making up our own characters. And so that's what I decided to do with this. I started to create a few little characters, just put a little bit of a story around them. And over time, that kind of, it caught on quite nicely. We started to draw some pictures, and actually the kids, as they got bigger, and here they are a little bit more recently, started to create some of their own characters as well. So they would come to me with these characters that they had created to explain, some of the emotions and things that they were going through in their life. And so my thought was, if this has managed to help me and my children have better conversations about these kind of negative emotions, about these limiting beliefs, why couldn't it work for other people as well? And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about our monsters and the process that we use, and hopefully it might help a few people on this call. And to do that, we're going to start by naming them. We're going to meet the monsters. So I'm going to share with you a small selection of the monsters that we've created, and we'll see in a moment which of these might resonate most with you. But to begin with, we're going to meet this little fellow called Problem Blob and the Worry Warts. So Problem Blob starts out his life as this tiny little worrywart. These are these sort of jelly-like, gelatinous, sticky, transparent creatures that kind of attach themselves to you like little whelks or leeches. When you're sort of starting to have like a bit of a niggle, a bit of a problem, with a bit of a sort of worry about something. And actually, you can't really notice them, other people can't really see them, but they will start to feed off that worry and they will grow. And as we kind of leave them unchecked, they can actually grow pretty rapidly. And we can suddenly find that we're actually carrying around quite a sizable weight with us. And the whole point behind this character was to really kind of convey that sense that when we do kind of let problems go unchecked and unmanaged, and we kind of let them, become a problem, they actually do come with that real sensation that we're carrying this weight around with us, and that can often be that indication that we're actually starting to deal with something that's causing us some harm. They can be really difficult to shake off. They're sticky, right? So you may find that actually, even when you're away from the situation where the problem's occurring, so it could be like a work-based problem, but you're out with your friends, your family, and you're still kind of finding yourself thinking about and focused on that issue. And that can really kind of mean that we end up struggling to relax. We feel like we're constantly switched on because our mind's constantly kind of going over and over and over this problem, trying to find a solution. So that is problem blog. The next one is the seeds of doubt. So this monster is one that's particularly plagued me over the years. So these are these tiny little seeds that bury themselves right down in our ears. They kind of gather together and they strike up this lovely negative chorus where they like to whisper to us all of the things that they think we're not very good at. Tell us all of those things like, no, you're going to fail if you try that. People might laugh at you. People will think you're stupid. All of those kind of like negative mantras that we might kind of hear in the back of our heads. And that kind of really leads us to step away perhaps from some of the opportunities that might help us grow and to carry us forward. And so self-doubt, I think, can make us mistrust ourselves. So it makes us doubt our own capabilities. It makes us question what we're really good at. But also, I think it's worth reflecting that it also leads us to mistrust other people. So we can often end up where we're sitting with self-doubt for a long time, starting to discount the positive feedback, the compliments that we get from other people, and we start to assume that there's maybe an ulterior motive, or people are just saying that. And as a result, we can kind of talk ourselves out of some really good opportunities. You might find where you're dealing with self-doubt that you actually struggle to communicate your kind of true feelings, your true views about things, because you're actually so focused on getting it wrong and how your message is going to be perceived by other people that you end up just not saying anything at all. And also, I think, again, when you're kind of sat with self-doubt and you're not kind of managing that, when it's becoming this kind of constant feeling, it can build up over time, and it can really create these bigger emotions, this sense of overwhelm and potentially even fear that we might begin to attach and associate with different situations and places, etc. So that is the seeds of doubt. This next one, tremble. So this is a monster that was actually created by my daughter, Emily. So when she started school, I think it's fair to say she didn't like it. She didn't like to go. It was a real struggle every day to encourage her to get into school. She would get very upset. And her way of explaining this to me and how it felt to her was that she was covered in spikes. Like there was this spiky feeling that she had all over her body, and that she could feel electricity running through her arms and her legs and her fingers. And so that's exactly what we use to create this creature, Tremble. So he is this little ball of barbed fur. So he's very spiky, he attaches himself to you, and he lets off this very kind of low level of electricity that is just enough to keep you feeling jittery, to keep you feeling on edge, leave you kind of perhaps feeling a bit fidgety and your heart racing. Because absolutely, when you're dealing with anxiety, one of the things that you might notice is that you experience physical sensations. So you experience that kind of rapid heartbeat, that kind of sweaty palms and all of that stuff. It can also have an impact on your ability to focus. So many of you might have found yourself sat in a meeting knowing that it's going to be your turn to speak soon, and you're waiting for that moment to come around when somebody asks you a question or you have to speak, and your focus has been entirely on that kind of moment of anxiety, so much so that you haven't really listened to anything going on around you. So that's very much something that I think people can experience with anxiety. And again, where we are sat with this, where this is going unchecked for a long period of time, it can lead to us kind of having poor sleep, feeling fatigued, feeling restless, and it all just feeds really into that kind of vicious cycle of then kind of just feeling sort of mentally unprepared for these situations. We then come to cloister. So this is another one that I created to try and explain this kind of sense of withdrawal and self-isolation that I was experiencing at one point. So cloister is this little monster that hides away in his shell. He really doesn't like to interact with anybody or anything, so much so that if you get anywhere near him, he's going to shoot out these little bubbles. And if you get trapped in one of those bubbles, you'll find that although you can see everything going on around you and everybody can see you, there is just this sense that there's this barrier that you can't quite move past, that's just separating you ever so slightly from the world around you. And so I think if anybody has ever struggled with imposter syndrome or from a sense of belonging, like lacking that sense of belonging, it can really contribute to this feeling that you just kind of want to withdraw into yourself, that you feel that little bit removed from things around you. And you might find, if you're struggling with this, that you're often sort of feeling like you're on the periphery of perhaps team events at work, even family events and social events, and you don't quite know how to kind of be more involved. You don't know how to be part of those groups. And over time, that kind of feeling of awkwardness can mean that you actually start convincing yourself that you should just avoid them altogether. And again, where you are dealing with these feelings of isolation, you might kind of think or hesitate about how you respond in certain situations. And this is maybe slightly less to do with self-doubt, and this is a little bit more to do with psychological safety and a lack thereof, of not kind of necessarily feeling like you belong enough to feel safe in sharing your opinions. So that one is cloister. This is another one, Maelstrom, that was created by my son, Jack. So Jack came home from school one day. Again, he was fairly young and he was full of excitement, all the things he'd learned about at school. He kind of headed up to his bedroom, ready to kind of like, you know, play with his stuff, to have a look at his toys. And he kind of appeared back down in the kitchen a little bit later, quite sort of agitated and a bit upset. But what he'd actually done was he'd drawn out this picture of a whirlwind, and he was explaining to me that he didn't know what choices to make. He'd got too many things to think about. He'd got too many choices in his room, and he felt like he'd just sat up there and he'd wasted all his time not knowing what to do. And so that's absolutely what Maelstrom's about. It's about that sense of overwhelm when we've got all of these different thoughts and ideas and tasks that are stacking up around us, that are just moving faster than we can actually kind of think through them and process them. So it's about that kind of sweeping away of our kind of clear-headedness. So we lose all of that clarity. We're just left feeling confused and kind of feeling like we've got this sense of urgency, but also kind of a little bit like we're not really sure where to begin with it. And so I think one of the ways that we can tell we're starting to deal with overwhelm is when we've got that very weird sensation of almost having that call to arms, that real sense of urgency, coupled with that kind of complete inertia and that kind of ability to actually move forward. And when you're dealing with overwhelm, what you can find is that you actually end up battling with looping worries. So this is slightly different to the problem block, where you were focused on like a single thing that you kind of kept coming back to. This is more about you've got these multiple kind of issues that are whirring around your head, and you're just constantly dotting around all of them. And as a result of that, you might actually end up forgetting things. So you might miss that deadline at work because you've been so focused on too many things. You might forget, if you're like me, to respond to that WhatsApp message that's been sat on your phone for 3 weeks. You might end up being late for a really important appointment. And it can be really, really easy to lose perspective and to kind of have that mountain out of a molehill moment where even those kind of everyday tasks that you might normally have taken in your stride suddenly feel like they are kind of insurmountable. They feel really difficult and really challenging. So that one is Maelstrom. And then last but not least, we have this horrible little creature. So this is Goosebump. He is a pimply, fleshy little ball of dread. He comes in with his big wide-eyed stare and his icy breath. And if he catches you in that stare, if he catches you in that icy breath on the back of your neck, you just end up with this real sense of dread in the pit of your stomach. So he kind of makes you feel like there's this real imminent danger that's going to kind of, sweep you up. You might feel that your muscles are tensing, again, that you're feeling like your heartbeat's getting faster. And you're either going to kind of want to run for the hills or perhaps feel like you are rooted to the spot. So, like so many of the monsters that we've met so far, this is another one that comes with real physiological responses, but I think it's fair to say that these are likely to be the strongest ones. So you might find when you're dealing with Goosebump, when you're dealing with fear, that you kind of get very physically shaky. Some people may find themselves feeling physically sick or being physically sick. People can get very emotional. They can get upset, perhaps, sort of getting teary. So some really strong responses we can associate with this. And you're likely to feel this heightened sense of awareness in situations because that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to scan the environment for danger. The problem is that you can often then start to read danger into the wrong places and perhaps kind of like misinterpret people's body language or a tone, a voice that somebody's using. And I think it's also important to recognise that when we are dealing with fear, it can often disguise itself as other emotions. So as we try and kind of wrestle control back, as we try and kind of pull ourselves away from that vulnerable state that fear often puts us in, we can end up tipping over into emotions such as anger. So that is just a small selection of the mental monsters that we've come up with over the years. What I'm going to ask Adrian to do now is to drop the poll into the chat, and I'm going to ask you to vote for as many of the mental monsters that you kind of relate to, basically. Now, I know that when this comes out on the recording, people won't be able to see this, so I will hopefully we'll have a look what the results come back with when they pop up, and I'll try and give a bit of a recap on it. But for now, if you want to have a vote.
I have launched the poll, so it should pop up on your screen, and I can see people voting. So we'll give a few minutes, and then I'll when we finish voting, I'll hit end poll, and then I think everyone should be able to see it. So in fact, 50% of people here have already participated, Helen. They're really quick today. That's fantastic. So we'll give just about 20 more seconds, then we'll. But there's at the moment there's a couple of in the lead, but no clear winner.
It's an interesting one. There's normally the same two whenever I've run this session that seem to come out on top. So I'm intrigued to see what this one kind of comes up with.
Okay, I'm literally going to give 10 more seconds, then I'm going to end the poll. So your last chance to vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm just going to very quickly. Sorry, no. There we go. End poll and share results. So I think now you should see those results, Helen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can see, that the two highest ones, so Seeds of Doubt come out on top, which is actually not unusual. That is quite a common one, closely followed by Maelstrom, which is actually, those are always pretty much the top two. Once I have had a session where Cloister got the top mark, but yes, we've got Seeds of Doubt on 73%, Maelstrom on 67%. Then we've got Problem Blob and the Worry Warts at 51%, and Cloister at 44%. Then I think it's Goosebump on 29% and Tremble on 27%. So lots of great votes on there, so we can start to see what people are kind of feeling challenged by. I'm just going to close that on my screen now. So we've just done our little vote there. We said that Seeds of Doubt came out on top. So the next bit then, we're going to talk about how we can unshame these mental monsters. So the first step, as we've just said, is definitely about identifying what it is that's challenging us at the moment. What is it that's holding us back? But actually, the next step is really to figure out, how do we move away from just internalizing those things? Like, how do we begin to share it with others? But that is, genuinely harder than it sounds. It's, I think, still something that's quite stigmatized in terms of people feeling like if they speak out about these things, that they are in some way going to be seen as less capable, that people are going to think, that this is a weakness for them. So there's a real, I think, fear around sharing these things with others. But the reality is that these are emotions that everybody experiences. So that poll that we've just seen, where everybody was voting for something, shows that everybody on this call, so I think there's like 60 odd people on this call, have all had experiences or are currently experiencing those kind of negative emotions. And that experience might come through in different ways. It might be felt in different situations, but it is, it's common amongst us, okay? And that's because these are perfectly normal human emotions. These are things that we are meant to experience. Things like fear have a real purpose to them. I think the difference is when they're turning up in the wrong places, or when they are actually kind of they're the things controlling us and we're not in control of them. And so the important thing becomes to talk about them. And to kind of get the ball rolling, I'm going to talk a little bit around how some of these things have affected me personally. So I'm not going to talk around each and every one of them. I'm going to pick out the three that have caused me the most issues, I guess. So I mentioned Seeds of Doubt when I was talking as being my kind of constant bedfellows. So certainly early on in my career as a BA, I'd done the courses, I'd learned the techniques, I'd got my job, I'd done my analysis, I'd go into the meetings with colleagues, with senior stakeholders, all ready to kind of like share my recommendations. And almost the second I would find myself in that meeting room, I would start to hear these little seeds of doubt whispering, are you really sure you've got this right, Helen? You've probably made a mistake. You're going to look stupid. People are going to think you don't know what you're doing. And all of those kind of messages and thoughts would come through my head, to the point where I would immediately start to dilute my messaging. And if anybody was to kind of question or, disagree with me, I could kind of find that kind of that sense that I needed to kind of pull back from what I was saying, just creeping in. And it was something that I really battled with and I found really difficult. The next one is Cloister. So again, I think I'm not a natural extrovert. I've had to work at kind of being good at reaching out to people. I naturally kind of tend to kind of withdraw into myself and to want to, find it easier sometimes to kind of work on my own and, not bother anybody. And certainly when I had that experience, again, that I spoke about at the beginning of the session today, where I lost a bit of confidence in kind of collaboration and facilitation, I found myself starting to do that more and more. I won't bother anyone. I'll just go off. I'll do my work. I would try and avoid situations where I would have to present. And again, that had real impact for me at the time on my relationship building in my role, and also, my visibility, like how I was able to kind of build the next steps of my career. And then the last one that I know a lot of people resonated with is that kind of Maelstrom character. So that, as a BA manager, I'm often kind of trying to balance, a view across multiple kind of projects or products. I'm trying to kind of keep on top of my conversations with members of my team and kind of supporting them in whatever they need from me. I've got the kind of strategic conversations that I need to keep going. There's maybe bits of recruitment and all of those kind of things that feed in there. And I will get to a point at times where I've got so many tabs open on my laptop that you can't, when you can't even read the writing on the tab. When you've got that many, I think that's when you're kind of heading towards overwhelm. And those kind of tabs on your screen are often reflected as the tabs in your brain. And you kind of just find yourself wildly clicking around and not really getting anywhere or making any progress with anything. But just kind of feeling like that those kind of tasks are continuing to stack up. So normally when I do this session, if it's in person, I would invite people to turn to the person next to them and to actually share one of the mental monsters that has impacted them, and just share very briefly how it has impacted them. Not looking for people to give advice or guidance or any of that, but just to share. Now, I know people have been doing that in the chat as we've kind of been going, and I know we can't obviously sort of talk to each other, but I'm going to just see if there's anybody who might be willing to share an example in the chat of how one of these mental monsters has impacted them or is impacting them now, just very briefly in the chat. And I'll just give a few moments just to see if anyone's able to.
And while people are typing, Helen, I don't mind sharing one from earlier in my career. I know this is a very specific one, but talk about like seeds of doubt. I can remember being in situations where I would feel like I was in a meeting and I didn't want to write stuff down because it's like, well, they'll think, why am I writing down such obvious stuff, right? Which is kind of, it's just kind of like in retrospect ridiculous, but yeah, that's how it felt at the time.
I've just seen as well, like there's somebody that's just popped. So Francesca, I think I'm sorry if I've not pronounced that correctly, but you've talked about like how they make you question your choice of role. Like that's actually something that I hear quite a lot of people saying. And firstly, like well done for sharing that, because I think, and anyone that's sharing stuff in the chat right now, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, to kind of start to share those vulnerabilities with people, particularly people that you don't know, and particularly on a webinar. So really well done. But that is, I think, something that lots of people speak about. And I think the really important thing that I try kind of to illustrate through this exercise is we need to just create the safe spaces to do this. And actually, as soon as that first comment went in, you'll see that 2 or 3 more might have popped up after it, because it takes one person to go first, and then we can really open that conversation up.
It's interesting. Sorry to interject, Helen, but they're coming in thick and fast. But one thing, Jodie, at the end of her comment put, paranoid people think I'm not good enough, and that's really interesting because that feels like it's a bit of a common golden thread through this, isn't it? Like the feeling of not being enough type of thing.
Yeah. And there's quite a few people that I think have called that out, say, not making progress, and then that kind of, so lots of these things linked together. You've got like that overwhelm, but then that feeds into this sense of self-doubt that your abilities, your effectiveness isn't where it's meant to be. Somebody else talking about other people that you think are more knowledgeable. So it's like that self-comparison, I think, is another kind of a trap that we all fall into. Okay. Thank you so much. And obviously, again, like, do feel free to keep sharing those. What I'm not going to do, however, is just ask you to share all your kind of like trauma in the chat and then kind of send you off to go home with no coping mechanism. So hopefully, the bit that we're going to move into now is actually about, okay, we've done that work to identify, what it is that's challenging us. We've taken some really brave steps in that chat to actually start to share some of it, with our fellow attendees on the call. So now, what do we do about it? What can we do to address those things? So we're going to look at how we can tame them and be our own heroes. And to do that, I'm going to introduce to you the confidence canvas. Now, there may be people on this call that aren't business analysts, but when I originally designed this session, it was for the BA conference, and I thought, well, what do BAs like? They like a good canvas, don't they? So, what's one more? You always need one more canvas. So I'm going to talk us through the different sections here, and hopefully all will become clear as to how you can use this. And we start on this in the middle with the section that says name your monsters. So this is we've done some of this already. So we're already halfway there, which is fantastic. So naming your monsters is all about, as we have done, just identifying for yourself the emotions, the limiting beliefs that you are currently dealing with, that you're currently being challenged by. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can just write down, I'm dealing with fear. Maybe you talk about other things like anger or jealousy. There's lots of different types of emotions we haven't necessarily touched on today. You can feel more than welcome to use the mental monsters that I've shared with you today. So you can, talk about Maelstrom, you can talk about seeds of doubt. But my recommendation is actually that you create your own monsters. And the reason that I suggest that is backed by science, because there have been studies that have shown that where we kind of engage ourselves in creative activities, where we're using our imagination, where we're being a bit playful, that actually that encourages new neural pathways. So it opens up new parts of our brain, which I think is fantastic. And it really increases our ability to problem solve. It allows us to look at things with a different perspective. So getting a bit creative, even if you're not the best drawer, can really kind of help you look differently at the things that you're struggling with. So that is the name the monsters bit. Then we come to connect. So again, exactly as we've just talked about, it's about taking those first steps to share what you're going through with somebody else. And the model that I've shared here, the 4Cs model, is one that I came up with that I think might just be like a good way to kind of help with this. So the 4Cs model is essentially just a way to categorize the different people that you've got in your network. So by network, I mean people, think about the groups that you're part of. So your family, people you work with, maybe clubs and groups that you're a member of. And we'll just talk through these different categories. So the first C is for connector. So these are the people in your network that are very knowledgeable about where to find things. So they will know perhaps like where to get the certain policies and documents and where to find all of the templates at work and things like that. They might be the people that know all the best places to eat and drink. And they're likely to be the people who know people, so they can kind of facilitate those introductions. And connectors can be really good if you're dealing with something like cloister, when you're feeling a little bit sort of isolated, you don't quite know how to kind of integrate yourself into certain situations. Connectors can be really good people to go and speak with. We've then got counsel. So these are your subject matter experts. These are the people that are, really knowledgeable about particular topics. So much so that they can offer really kind of practical advice and guidance on a particular area. And so these are the people that you might want to go and speak to if what you're dealing with is the problem blob. So they will help you with some real tangible ways to break that down and address it. And then we've got our cheerleaders. So these are our rays of sunshine, the people that champion others, the people that kind of always shine a spotlight and or share their spotlight with other people. And so I think cheerleaders can be good people to go and speak to if what you're dealing with is seeds of doubt, because they're likely to help you build a more positive picture of yourself, and they're going to champion you to you, and they're also going to champion you in front of other people as well. And then finally, we've got confidants. So these are not necessarily people that you're going to go to for advice. You're not expecting them to kind of come up with any guidance in particular, but they're people that you feel you can trust with perhaps more sensitive topics, and you can trust that they're just going to sit with you. They're not going to judge. They're just going to listen to what you've got to say. So perhaps where you're dealing with some of those more, those stronger emotions, those kind of those difficult situations involving fear or anxiety or overwhelm, where there's kind of high emotion involved, they can be the people that you might want to seek out and speak to. So that is the connect space. And then we come to reframe. So this is all about tools that help you think differently about the problem that you're having. There are different techniques that you can find, and I encourage you to research this. And I'm just going to share with you one that has helped me in particular with the seeds of doubt. So again, this is one that I picked up from the Change Ninja books. And it's all about the power of yet. And it's a really simple exercise where you start by writing down the thing that you think you can't do. So lots of people say to me, oh, how do you do this public speaking? I could never speak in public. And so you write that down. I can't speak in public. And the very first step that you take is to write the word yet at the end of that sentence, because that immediately moves you from this kind of fixed mindset to a growth mindset. It opens up this possibility that things are going to change. You then think of something that you used to be unable to do, but you can now. So, that could be anything. It could be a language that you've learned, that you can code now. You didn't used to be able to code. It can be things like, I used to be unable to drive, but now I can. Because that is proof that you have previously transitioned from, an inability to do something to an ability to do something. So it's that evidence that you've evolved. So let's use that example then of like learning to drive. I used to be unable to drive. We then need to just break that down into, well, what are the steps that help me kind of to grow that skill? So, I would have, booked some driving lessons. I will have read the highway code, all of those kind of things. What resources and support did I use? So did you have friends or family that took you out for a drive around the roads and helped you practice 3-point turns in Asda car park? And then what mistakes did you make? And I think this is the really important one, because we need to know that actually that failure, those mistakes, are a natural part of learning. So I failed my theory test the first time and I failed my practical test the first time. But when we bring all of that together, what it helps us to do is to create a plan, to create a set of steps that we can use and apply to our current challenge. And, use that as a way to help move us forward. What are the small steps that we can take? What are the resources that we can use? I've just popped it on here as well. This is an NHS, it's a UK website that offers some other techniques around cognitive behavioural therapy. There are probably lots of other resources out there that you can use as well that help you think about different things you can do in that space. So we then come to the regulate space. So we talked as we went through the mental monsters that, lots of these emotions come with physical responses, and we need a way sometimes to help us to manage those in the moment. So I'm just going to share again with you a couple that work for me, but it can be very personal. So again, this is something that maybe you want to spend a bit of time looking at. But there's lots of breathing techniques, for example. The one I'm going to share with you today, and I'm going to ask you to do it along with me as well if you'd like to, is called the physiological sigh. And very, very simply, you take in a long breath through your nose. So inhaling in. When you think you've reached the top, we're going to do another short intake of breath in through the nose. And then one long exhale through the mouth. And you would do that about 3 or 4 times. And it can be really good when you're dealing with anxiety or fear, because when you're getting all that adrenaline and cortisol sort of thrown at you, what this does is it engages your parasympathetic nervous system, and it sends all the right signals to your brain that says, it's okay, we can calm down, there's no danger, and it starts to regulate your heartbeat and regulate your breathing. The other one that I use is a bit of a mindfulness technique, which I find helps me to deal with overwhelm, and it's called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. And it's a really easy one to do when you kind of like sat in a meeting or something and you need to just recenter yourself. So you look for 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 sounds that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and something that you can taste. And just that act of like listing something out just helps to kind of like, again, kind of refocus your thinking activity. So the final part of the canvas then is this challenge space. So this is all about just picking small things that will move us away from our kind of comfort zone, really. And it can be something really small. So going back again to the seeds of doubt, maybe it's just going to be challenging yourself to have like a positive mantra that you're going to say to yourself in the mirror for a month. Or you could decide to throw yourself in the deep end, and you could say, oh, that thing that I keep telling myself I can't do, I'm just going to actually go out there and do it. I'm going to do the public speaking. It's up to you how big or small you make it. But this challenge space is where the real transformation actually happens, because every time that we commit ourselves to an activity that takes us out of our comfort zone, what we're doing is we are showing ourselves that we're the ones that are in charge, not the monsters. And that's the really important thing, because actually taming these limiting beliefs is not about never feeling fear or never feeling anxiety or never, dealing with worries. It's about moving forwards in spite of them. And I think that's the really important thing to remember as we kind of come to the end of my presentation, is that by challenging ourselves, every single time we do that, that is one more monster that is slayed. And so I'm going to now congratulate you all, because you are all now official monster slayers. And I'm going to invite any questions that you might have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Helen. I've been listening intently, uh, as I know everyone has. So, do a definite virtual round of applause here for Helen, and I can see the virtual round of applause is coming up on the screen there. And we will cover as many questions as we can. We've got just a few minutes. I've got a few announcements at the end as well. So do stay till the very end if you're here now. So let's go through as many questions as we can. So Farah asks, what are some of the standout experiences and opportunities that you have taken in the past 12 months that have contributed to you seeing the monsters less frequently?
That is a really good question, Farah. So I think part of it has been about just starting to talk about them. So taking that opportunity to literally just kind of talk about them in front of other people has kind of almost sort of helped me get a different perspective in my own mind on them, and kind of sort of make me feel definitely kind of less like I'm on my own. I mentioned to Adrian before the call started quite how many people, whenever I post about this topic, reach out and share their own stories with me. So just that act of me sharing my own experiences, I think, has given me a sense of comfort that has kind of like spurred me on to keep kind of talking about this stuff. And then I think just doing things like this. I mean, I didn't start by just inviting myself onto webinars. I'd start by like doing something at work, like a small presentation, trying to speak out more frequently in meetings. And I think every single time I've done a bit of that, it's unlocked another piece of the puzzle for me.
Fantastic, fantastic. Excellent. Yeah, those kind of small things, the incremental gains over time, small marginal gains. So our next question is from Emily. Emily says, "Do you think the monsters are a result of our own thinking process? So they're not monsters that other people have imposed on us. So are they from our own internal thoughts, or are they imposed on us from others and the environment?"
I think it's probably a mixture, if I'm honest. I did some really interesting exercises when I did some coaching, which was another experience that really helped me. But where I kind of like thought back to where some of these things originated from. So where did I? So actually doing an exercise where I mapped out what some of my limiting beliefs were. So what were the things that I thought about myself, and kind of thought about those as like the branches of a tree, and then sort of tried to trace them back down to the roots and think, well, where did that come from? And some of it was like, well, I remember a teacher that said this to me, or I remember a friend that might have made a comment, or an ex-partner or something and I think understanding where some of those kind of self-beliefs had originated from, again, helped me to kind of, it took the power away from them a little bit, and it made me understand like how silly that, you know, as a grown up now, like I am still kind of attributing this like sense of myself to something that somebody said to me when I was 6. And it kind of makes you think very differently about it, I think.
That's fascinating, Helen, and I love what you said there about you said something along the lines of take the power away. And I think that's such that really resonated when you said that, because it's like almost by naming it, by realizing it, sometimes maybe finding the source of it, that maybe kind of dissolves it in a way. I mean, that's not, that makes it sound easy, which I know it isn't, but there's that kind of process. Um,
Yeah.
so excellent. So Michelle asks, do you notice that different types of people suffer from different mental monsters? I wonder if BAs are better at covering things up than children, for example.
I think there's a real sense with like it has been amazing like how many VAs in particular have kind of resonated with this topic. I think because we do find ourselves in a lot of the situations where I think we're prone to these kind of like thinking patterns. So we're quite often like having to perhaps go against like the general, you know, public consensus. We might have to go in with a different opinion. We're having to ask questions. So we're putting ourselves in those situations that already feel a bit uncomfortable. And so I think, and because we do that for so long, I guess we do get used to masking it a little bit because it's almost like part of the day job. And I think then we start to kind of like blur the lines between, you know, when that's just us kind of having to sit in an uncomfortable situation for our job, and when actually we are actually just there's things that we haven't dealt with in terms of our own kind of, as I say, limiting beliefs. So it can be harder for us, I think, to pick that out, and we can be a bit unkind to ourselves about, well, we should be good at this, we should be able to do it, but we're just human beings.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into Michelle's next question about do BAs have more than our share of mental monsters because the role is so broad and context specific. And that's sort of, as you were saying there, actually we're sometimes in situations where perhaps it plays on them a little bit more. Um, so Good. So I'm just looking through. We've probably got time for one more, which let's take the final question from Jason. Jason asks, would it be beneficial to keep a mental monster diary to track positive mental monster slaying progress and to recognize that your identified mental monster might change over time? That's a really
That's
interesting
a really
question.
good one, and yeah, and actually that sounds like a really great idea. It might be something that I start to do. I mean, I definitely found it's not exactly the same thing, but journaling was something for me that helped me first start to recognize, I guess, what some of those symptoms of these limiting beliefs were, and to kind of understand the triggers for them as well. And when you start to understand some of those things, like when are these mental monsters really kind of coming to the fore? What happened that kind of really brought that out? That
Yeah.
sometimes then helps you to kind of understand, well, what was it about that situation? How could I manage that differently next time? So yeah, I really love that idea of that diary and associating that with your mental monsters, and definitely like seeing if they diminish over time, or, you know, do other things kind of come into play.
Fantastic. And then I know I said that's the final question. We'll just do one more, and this is like in a word, like an answer in a word. Um, in your four C's in the Connect space, can one person play more than one role?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
thought that would probably be a very quick one to answer, so I thought we could
Yeah, no,
we
totally. People can be
we
more than one of those. You can identify with more than one of those yourself. And it's interesting to think, which category do you think you would be in? What role could you play for others that are struggling with mental monsters?
Fantastic. Well, Helen, thank you so much. I feel like we could carry on talking for a whole nother hour, but we are at the end, or very nearly at the end of the session. So again, a massive thank you, Helen, and another virtual round of applause. How is the best way for people, if people want to connect with you, stay in touch? How can they connect?
I am on LinkedIn, so you can just search me as Helen Holder. You will see my little smiley picture on there. I've done a newer one recently, so it looks a little bit more like me. So, yeah, find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And Michelle says, brilliant session. Well done, Helen. You absolutely smashed it. In fact, there's lots of good stuff coming in on the chat. And I've just put Helen's LinkedIn link on the chat. So do, again, it's another way of showing that the session has resonated with you. If you are on the line, just stay on the line for about 2 more minutes, just a few community announcements. So first of all, just in case any of you aren't aware of BA Digest, I hope you are. But if you aren't, BA Digest is a free quarterly PDF magazine. If you signed up and opted in when you signed up for this webinar, you will get access to that automatically when it comes out. But just in case you aren't on that list, the Q1 edition was released relatively recently, and here is a link to it, so you can go and download that. If you are ever interested in writing an article for BA Digest, get in touch. You don't have to be a professional author, whatever that means. It could even be a way of slaying a mental monster, perhaps. Who knows? And indeed, if you'd like to be on a community webinar like this, always worth a conversation. Also, the next two events have been announced, both in March, and they're slightly different. So March is going to be slightly different format for online events. They are LinkedIn Live, and the little espresso sessions. So they're 15-minute conversations. So we've got the Theatre of Control with Russell Mears on the 5th of March, and practical AI tips for practical requirements, product requirements documents on the 23rd of March. April and May, I haven't quite finalised yet, but they will be announced relatively soon. So keep an eye out on that. And then just in case anyone's interested, something a little bit different, but in the background, I've been working on a new training course on discovery. I've actually changed the name of it now. So if you and your team are interested in doing like initial and continuous discovery, then we now have a one-day masterclass on that. If you're interested, please get in touch about that. Always worth a conversation. But other than that, thank you very, very much. Thanks again, Helen, for such a really, really enthralling, engaging session. And thank you for everyone who tuned in live or indeed on the recording. So have a good rest of your day, everyone, and hope to catch up soon. So thanks again. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.